Hello Painting 2 students, we're about to start the good copy of our landscape watercolor piece. You've been outside for a couple days doing some sketches and doing some preliminary quick paintings, thumbnails in your sketchbook. And so this is just a quick one that I did just to figure out the layout of what I'm going to do on my good copy. I have my 11 by 18 piece of watercolor paper. I've got a nice drawing board to mount this to. Before we begin, we need to take some of the adhesive off of this tape, and we are going to tape on a border onto this, and then we will start laying out our piece. So taking some of the adhesive off of this tape is the first step. Not a lot. We still want to make sure it has a nice seal on top of this, and I'm trying to make a uniform border that's about 1 centimeter in width the whole way around. And if you wanted to get technical, you could use a ruler and figure this out, but I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I think it's going to be fine. And the nice thing about taking some of the adhesive off the tape, not a lot, is that you can pick it up and readjust if you think you got it wrong. And I'm going to let that overshoot just a little bit. And we'll continue to do the same thing. Taking some of that adhesive off on your pants is an easy way of doing it. And we'll make that go the whole way around. Now, you don't always have to stretch or size a piece of watercolor paper before using it, but some watercolor artists do this every single time. They use a clean sponge or a clean brush loaded with just clear water, no watercolor in it at all, and just kind of wet the surface of the paper gently when attached to a piece of board, and this helps it avoid some of the warping that you tend to get on paper. Now, if it's a thick enough piece of watercolor paper, it may not matter anyway, but letting this get damp or size it before you start may help later with any warping. And I'm going to let this dry completely. Now, there are folks too that if you're doing a nature scene will re-wet the paper before they begin to get a wet-on-wet technique, and that's something that we'll probably do as well. But I'm doing this stage even before I make my preliminary sketch on the paper, just so that I have a better shot of this stretching and sizing and not warping after I'm done. So the watercolor paper is now dry again, and what kind of happened, and this will probably happen to yours too, is because the tape got wet, because I wet the whole paper, it is a little bit warped, but because it got wet, the tape is not working as well as it once did. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of from the center out, make sure that's sealed down better again, and then just to make sure, and this time you don't have to take any of the adhesive off the tape. I'm just going to go right over that piece of tape that's already on there with one that's real sticky, that's going to hold that whole thing down, and then I'm just going to work my way the whole way around the composition, and that should ensure that this thing is not coming up, okay? And even if you don't make it the whole way to the edge, the purpose is just to tape the tape down that you already had there to make sure that it's not going anywhere, okay? So that, you're gonna re-tape over that taped edge before we begin our sketch and our painting. So we're a little farther along. You can see my original preliminary quick sketch that I did outside, and I am, sketching this outside, but I took a picture I'll show you here in a second that I used for reference. But you can see that I'm leaving out a lot of details. I'm actually drawing a little darker than I should just because I wanted it to show up on my video camera. And the name of the game here is you want to draw as lightly as you possibly can. 1, so that you can erase if you make a mistake, and 2, so we really don't see that much evidence of the pencil through the watercolor. Not that it's unattractive, it's just it starts to mess with your colors too as the graphite blends in with the water and the pigment that you put on the paper. So although I did draw this mainly while sitting on my stool outside, right outside the loading dock area here, I took a picture for reference, especially on the parts that I knew I would really need to focus on. That railing is very technical. So I made a lot of mistakes. I need to clean that up. What you're going to do at this stage, if you made too many marks on it like I did, like this is a little too dark to leave before I start painting, and I need to lighten it up a bit, and I'm going to do that with a kneaded eraser. It's a gentle eraser that won't tear up the paper too much. So I'm going to go in and kind of erase any stray lines that I have. But notice, like with the tree, like I definitely just put the main features of the direction of the branches and where they flow and how wide the entire tree is going to be. I didn't get into leaves or small branches or anything like that. Even with the vehicles, I'm just getting into basic shapes and areas where that is. I'm just trying to find angles where I'm going to fill in between shapes. Okay, so I finally think I'm at a place where I'm ready to begin the painting itself. Okay, so I know the drawing and the prep work with something this technical takes longer, but if you're just doing, trees, hillsides, simple road, no vehicles, it's probably not going to be taking nearly as long to do this portion of it, but I think I'm ready to start. And what I'm going to do, you'll kind of see as I start the painting, is I'm going to start with just 1 or 2 colors, and I'm just going to apply them sporadically throughout the painting to create a sense of unity, and everything starts very watered down with most watercolor paintings. And a lot of what you're trying to do is to protect the white area that you intend to keep. So, I know we're doing this outside, but just so you can see from my photo, you can already guess, like, the cars I'm going to try to keep white. A lot of the sky I'm going to try to keep kind of light. I might make, stain the surface a bit in between the tree. I'm not just going to go paint the whole tree, green. First of all, it's not green, but anyway, it's just there's a lot of negative space there that I need to protect. So you don't want to just start filling in shapes. You kind of have to be careful about what you want to try to avoid. The highlights on the steps, where the light is hitting the concrete, and even like the top of the roof. With something that technical, I may even use a crayon, the tip of a crayon, to apply a little wax, or frisket, which we can talk about later, but is a wax solution that you can put on there and then later peel off. So protecting your white areas, but starting to put on your first wet layer, and you can even apply it as a wet on wet layer by wetting the paper surface first and then letting your paint hit that. So we're outside, we have all our materials. I've got my drawing board with my painting attached to it. I've got my watercolor set, I've got my water, get some extra water maybe, and all my brushes and some paper towel. And what I've kind of started already, I snuck ahead and I started activating my colors. I'm not going to make the sky straight out blue. I mean, first of all, it's not, but I am going to include some at the beginning. So what I did was I wet the surface of the paper first to create a wet on wet technique, and then added a little bit of that activated blue in the edges of the paper. And one of the things I decided to do, and I'm going to throw a little bit in between the branches of the trees too, is to use some of that blue also down in my concrete, and even in this area in between the spokes of the railing, just to create a sense of unity. Okay, so I know there's not blue in the concrete, and I realize there's not blue over here, but oftentimes with watercolor paintings, it's a good idea to use a color multiple places so that your eye kind of plays a game of connect the dots. So if I'm adding a little blue in the sky, I'm also adding a little blue somewhere else. I may even add a little blue in the reflection or the shadow of this vehicle over here. And I might even add a little blue in the shadow of that electrical box over there. And I may even add a little blue in the roof of that building over there. A good rule of thumb with watercolor painting is to go light to dark and wet to dry. So I'm starting with some yellows and some light greens, and I'm kind of trying to throw a little bit throughout where the leaves, the foliage is going to be in that tree. And because I used it up there, I also want to maybe use it other places too. So I'm going to throw a little bit of that same shade of green in the lawn. I may even throw it in the stains on the sidewalk. Like I said, the name of the game is trying to unify this piece so it all looks like it belongs together. I'm not saying slap paint all over the whole thing, but you want to let your brush kind of dance from one part to the other. If you paint on one section, you want to make sure you're going to other sections with that same tint or shade. I might even throw a little bit in the reflection on this car over here, or on the side of this roof over the cafeteria. Now, as you use less water, as the painting progresses in darker colors, you might do less of this, but especially while the colors are very light, you're going to see a lot of evidence of that. I might even include some yellow in the railing. Even though the railing's brown, it's got a warm brown feel to it, so if I let some of that yellow show through, that might help me later. So you can kind of get the idea. Right now I just have blue and yellow. You might look at this scene and say, well, there's not really a whole lot of blue and yellow out there, but as I add to it, some of those colors may peek through and help me. This first stage of the game, this is about as far as you're going to get. So far we've created a very light pencil sketch of our whole composition, and we've introduced some wet light colors, and we didn't just keep them in one section. We kind of sporadically spread them out throughout the composition so that we could create a sense of unity for the first layer. And this is where you should try to get to in the next couple days.